up Peter Phippen wears many hats, and he's kind of be speaking on from the perspective of the town of Essex.
That's right. I know that Ross early on introduced me as Mass Bay's National Estuary Partnership and Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, but for this presentation, I'm going to have on my Selectman Town of Essex hat and my town representation on Pye Rivers. So we've had a lot of partners on this project, as you can see, mostly funding. Pushing, okay. But Pye Rivers was really the organization that initiated this project. They came to us early on after they had prioritized culvert restriction projects throughout the watershed and identified this one on Apple Street as a high priority project. At the same time, when we were going for funding with DER, the 2018 storm came along and flooded out this section of Apple Street right at the culvert and another section immediately adjacent to it. You can see that the culvert is definitely undersized. I think it's a 30-inch round culvert, and it wasn't certainly wasn't transporting aquatic animals and plants through it, and barely water. But also, the project site is the red at the bottom of the photograph there. Both the culvert and the low areas in the roadway. That area hasn't really flooded all that much until 2018. Up at the top of the slide, the blue area is the Essex Causeway, Route 133 Estate Road, that floods fairly frequently, certainly with major storms and often with astronomical high tides. It'll be impassable. The Apple Street site, as I mentioned, is also a substandard stream crossing that interrupts the natural flow from one side to the other. But with sea level rising, more and more, this site is going to be a problematic, not only because of the culvert, but because of the access from one side of the town to the other. So here you see the causeway, typical flooding situation, flooding fairly frequently. We've tried to work with MassDOT to try to elevate that when they were doing some restoration work on the roadway about a decade or so ago. They didn't want to attempt it because of the impact it would have on the businesses that are located so closely to the roadway. And even the bridge, for any of you that came from south of Essex, even the bridge that's being replaced right now, although it failed because of sea level rise and water getting up underneath it and freezing and causing the bridge to weaken, they're only raising the bridge about an inch. And that's because of the landings on either side of the bridge would be too high, and they don't want to attempt to do that and impact businesses. So at this point, there is nothing happening with the Essex Causeway.
Impacting businesses now?
Certainly is. Certainly is, but it would be impacting them on an everyday basis, and the businesses can deal with this, maybe, at least for the time being. So the only other way to get across town for emergency vehicles, police, fire, DPW during storm events is Apple Street, or was Apple Street, and now we're losing that. You can see the causeway in blue. It's about a 2-minute drive across that. Apple Street isn't great, but it's better than going all the way around on 128, which is 20-25 minutes to get from one side of town to the other, which is totally unacceptable. So we knew we had to do something to allow passage on Apple Street during storm or high water events, which, as I mentioned, are going to become more and more frequent. Even during dry weather situations, the causeway floods. And you can see that the channel leading up to where I think probably the Apple Street site is directly below where the drone took this photograph. And that will become more and more frequent, of course. Here's the site. So you're looking west from the intersection with Southern Ave. The culvert, you can see where it is, indicated on the map, and that's where one of the low spots in the roadway is, where it floods. Just around the bend in that photograph is where the second low spot is, the middle photograph up top. And it's another low spot. It's really hard to tell the elevations here because of the photograph. You can see the stream channel where after it passes underneath the roadway, it parallels the road before it goes right into the marsh. Typical view of the upland edge, the 1 foot expansion of the road, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later, and then where the project ends up going uphill and the end of the project site. It's about 800 feet long from start to finish. This is just showing different recurrence interval, different years out, and what flood depths and lengths will be at the site. So you can see that there'll be a lot of flooding coming up in the next 50 years or so. And this is what we're looking at. Currently, you're looking at a 10.6 foot storm elevation. When you add storm surge on top of it, you're up at 4.3, which brings you to 14.9. So this is what we're designing for. The flood elevation with a little bit of freeboard is at 15.3. That's what we're looking at now. You can see the yellow is where the culvert is currently. The blue line is where 2018 flooding went, and the black line at the bottom is showing those two dips, the low spots where the road was flooded out. What we're looking at replacing the culvert with is a 3-sided natural stream bottom that will allow access for terrestrial and aquatic plants underneath easily. It's 10 by 5 box bridge, and it meets the MassDOT standards for a 10-year storm. I'm sure it's going to meet way more than that. This is the option that we chose to go with. The other there were 4 options altogether. This is the third alternative. The other 3 were retaining wall at different elevations and a sloping at a different elevation. We went with the 1.5 to 1 sloping so that you could have a steeper slope going into the marsh. It's a rock fill covered with compost, so you get vegetation growing on it, but it keeps it from going out too far into the marsh. Because of different design standards for roadways and such, we needed to add guardrail, which added a little bit of width. We needed to widen the road because it's only 18 feet now. It's a narrow road. We couldn't get away with just keeping it at that. And also we're sloping into the upland edge as well. Here's a couple of cross sections, the red line being what exists now. And you can see the roadway and the rock fill sloping on the side. And you can see that there isn't a lot of expansion into the marsh side with the way it's been designed. So what are some of the challenges to this project? It's obviously funding is always an issue. Over the last 4 or 5 years almost, it's been a patchwork of grants from DER and the Municipal Vulnerability Program, as well as CZM to help us get to, and right now we're in the MVP permitting and final design. So we still have another year of that to go before we even look at construction. And that will be another large grant as well. Permitting for, something this complex, environmentally, and as well as a scenic town road is also a difficult challenge. We've got to go through MEPA review, MassDOT bridge review, planning board, conservation, all the usual permits. So it's going to be a long and difficult process, I'm sure. And then the cost, obviously, at $4.5 million. It's a very expensive project. We're looking at, we're on the list with MEMA for getting some 90% funding from them, and we hope to get the remaining 10% from the state if we can. So there's a lot of places where this project could fail. And the final challenge is something, we expected some pushback from the NIMBY crowd, even though this project is not in sight of any house or adjacent to any house, but we knew we'd get something. But we were surprised a little bit by the fact that there were so many people that were against a public health and safety project, as well as an environmental improvement to the channel there. But you can see the protesters out there, and with good cause. But I think the permitting will allow us to address many of the issues. There'll be some tree removal. There'll be some stone walls that will have to be taken down and rebuilt. The guardrail we're looking at is a pre-aged guardrail, which residents nearby claimed that wasn't needed at all. And then I think it was just last week, you see the little inset in the guardrail picture of a car that went over the edge right at the site and had to be dragged out. But so we're moving through that as well. It'll be another couple of years before we probably even begin construction. So 7 or 8 years for the project is what we're looking at. And as I mentioned, the causeway is more or less not on anybody's radar for being improved, or at least not on the state's radar, and it's their property for being improved. So we're looking at this as a coastal retreat project. We're giving up on the causeway during storm events and flooding events. Not that Apple Street is a good candidate for everyday local traffic that is carried on the on 133, but at least we can get emergency vehicles back and forth during critical times. The project also provides essential connection for aquatic and terrestrial plants and animals along the stream channel, which is equally important. But the real rub is going to be what happens when when we really do have to raise the causeway or come up with some solution for the Essex Causeway, and those businesses will either have to move or something will have to happen there. So that's the dilemma, and that's why nothing has been done there or proposed there at this point. Any questions? I know it's lunchtime, so I wanted to go fairly quickly. Dave.
What did they do differently on the new bridge? Like you said, there was no unveiled because of reasons.
They didn't do anything different.
They built it just exactly
pretty much the same. I mean, it's more modern construction. The bridge was, I don't know, 50 years old or so, but they didn't raise it at all. It's concrete cast, concrete beam cast. So it's the same sort of thing. Yeah.
Being a coastal retreat project, are you seeing that you're going to be fighting for funds as more people are affected by sea level rise? Or are you trying to get in first?
We're trying to get in first, and that's what that MEPA or MEMA funding is. It's really sort of coastal retreat funding and emergency funding that's allowing us. That's why it's at 90% and not 50% or 40%. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Oh,
I was going to ask about the people who are protesting. What do they say? Are they just don't want that road changed at all?
I don't know what their argument is. They're not saying that, but that's my gut feeling. Is it's a very narrow road. It winds around. They're thinking that widening it up, even though it's only an 800-foot section of a 1.5 miles of road, it will cause people to speed more. People walk it and jog it. They want to kind of keep it as their private road, I think. I'm not really sure what the objection is, but they do have the point of, moving the stone walls and taking down trees and that sort of stuff, which will occur. Yeah.
And the reason that the business people, again, don't want the normal movement is because it's
impact their daily lives, their ability to make money, and there's no way to kind of jury rig a bridge around.
Well, yeah, a bridge would be extremely expensive, but it was hard to tell in that photo, but the businesses are within, 10 to 20 feet of the roadway, and the parking is within 10 to 20 feet of the roadway. If you raise up the roadway 5, 8 feet, whatever, you're going to have very, very steep slopes because there's no way to spread it out into the parking lots and driveways and things of that nature. So
it's ground zero for street level rides.
Totally. And some of the businesses, I remember in 2018 when there were those 3 storms right in a row, one of the restaurants there, I remember seeing after the first storm, they got flooded out because they're right there at water level. And I remember seeing them pull their carpets out and replacing it with new carpet. A week later, another storm flooded them out. They pulled their carpets out again, and I'm sure they're thinking this will never happen again. A week later, it happened again, and they pulled their carpets out. 3 weeks in a row, they replaced their carpets. I mean, if that happens, that will start to happen more and more regularly. And so then these businesses will have to make a decision. Is it worth it to keep addressing these flood issues, or should we get out of here? And that's
what the town is thinking about that as a whole.
Yes,
the coastal town faces these issues, and it's very difficult to deal with.
Well, the general population, I don't know, but certainly the professionals and the boards in town understand the issue. The business community wants to keep it as best they can without change, but they want improvement without doing anything. Whereas everybody knows that at some point something needs to be done, and at the board level anyway. Yeah. Yes.
So as each community that's represented here has to look at issues related to sea level rise and as pertains to infrastructure, whether it's transportation, water, whatever form of infrastructure you have, we have to figure out, well, how long are we going to try to protect for? And obviously everything's trapped. We don't really know what sea level rise, their models. We can have, there are estimates for sea level rise, rates of sea level rise. You chose 50, or meaning Essex chose 50 years.
Yeah, that's a standard planning horizon for now. Yeah.
So where did you find that as a standard?
It's the state uses it. It's pretty common. But yeah, I mean, I would venture to guess that if the town had its druthers, they would go about trying to find a solution, if they could get grant funding, to raise the causeway. But since this is a state roadway, we don't have jurisdiction over it. We would work with the business community to do something and raise the causeway. But the state doesn't want to do that at this point anyway. Any other questions? Thank you.